which was about step-down beds out of the North Middlesex Hospital. And I said, they were looking at criteria for the step-down ward. And I said, why are we recreating the criteria? Why don't we use the same criteria we used for step-down in the first wave? And they said, because it's not enough. The pressure is absolutely huge now. So the numbers in hospital are much larger. So the ask of the critical care system before this wave was to massively increase their capacity, which they've done. And it's that which is full and it's that which is struggling. So the beginning of, but just before in Christmas Eve, there was a call to arms from the Whittington and the North Mid that they were struggling, and the Royal Free and Barnet weren't finding it as difficult. But the middle sort of Saturday night between Christmas and New Year, the Royal Free and Barnet said they needed help. So we put out a call to arms, which went across lots of the WhatsApp groups, and really, really grateful because a lot of you would have gone in to actually help out in the hospitals, help out in A&E and a variety of other settings. But a lot of the feedback that we got was it was a bit chaotic. There wasn't any time to really plan it. So what we're looking to do is really to streamline to help the system. So the acute hospitals, and particularly Barnet and North Middlesex, out of all the NCL hospitals, are really struggling. I mean, partly it's because people are surviving where they didn't in the first wave. So where they're surviving, they're staying in hospital longer with all the inherent needs they are. So there's more strain on the beds, more strain on A&E, more strain on London ambulances. So they can't offload patients. So then it's delaying patients being called in, and the waits for the highest priority for things like strokes and heart attacks are significant, much higher than they ever have been before. And anything that we can do to help in the system is really, really gratefully received. I've got so if you, those of you who would have seen the NCL bulletin, and if you look on the COVID microsite, there are details about where we need support. And I just thought it would be helpful to outline it for you. So we have rapid response that we are hugely increasing what the ask is, and the medical ask for rapid response. London Ambulance Service are looking for support, actually going physically into hubs to having clinical support in the hubs for answering clinical queries to help them with their streamlining. The acute COVID service has increased the volume that they're seeing. It's increased the hours that they're doing it, and it's increased they're doing it over the weekend. And that's an absolute key priority, that it's only an effective service if we have enough GPs helping out with that. We're having step down wards, so that's at Chase Farm. There's something called the Highlands ward, which they're looking for help to staff. The Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital, they've essentially turned into a four-ward COVID, where they're having acute COVID patients. So there's a huge array of where the system is looking for support. So that's the intra-system support. And some of that is within general practice, and some of that is being run by the Federation, and some of that is giving support to the rest of the system. There is also the way out of this issue, we all know, is vaccination. So I'm going to in a minute touch on vaccination, but just aware that it is hard work delivering vaccines, and actually any support that you're able to give, and that's across your practice. So it will be doctors, nurses, admin support, volunteers if you've got them to help do marshalling. All hands on the deck will be really helpful, because the ask of the vaccinations are going to go up as well. So in terms of what you can do, Anisha, I just emailed just before, I don't know if you've got it, a little paragraph with an email address in it, which is for the NCL COVID email. If you're able to put that in, that would be really helpful. The letter that came from NCL at the end of last week was about looking to prioritise to actually help where is this acute need in the system. So what we're asking to do is really have a look between yourselves and your practices. What are you offering? What is it possible to stand down? We are going to send out the RCGP prioritisation, which is light touch. It doesn't give, it won't go through and tell you absolutely everything what you can do and what you can't do. And indeed, there needs to be some flexibility. But really, I just wanted to use a few minutes of this meeting just to really say the need is really, really huge. And we have had some people volunteering. I know, as I said, some people volunteered over the bank holiday weekends. We've had some people volunteer since as well. but actually, please can you all have a think about what you can do individually and in your practices to release some really much needed time to help the system, which will ultimately help our patients and help ourselves. So thanks very much, Anita. She's just put up the little paragraph there in the chat, and it's got the NCL COVID email address. So if you could have a think about what support you're able to give, and then email in and just say that you're from Barnet. We're coordinating this, as I said, to make it effective, it needs to be coordinated. So we're coordinating it, making sure that indemnity is sorted out, making sure that all the nuts and bolts of what you would need to know to get support is actually sorted out. But this really is a huge plea, and it's also a thank you to those of you who have offered support as well, because quite a lot of people have. But we still need more. There is a lot more support that's needed. So both within vaccine, within your PCN hubs with vaccination and with the whole system, we really need your support. So very grateful for what you can offer. I don't know whether anyone's got any questions they want to ask me about that before I just go on to a vaccine update. Arma?
Hi, Charlotte. It was just about, where we are standing down non-urgent stuff. It's all well and good us as practices being told that. There is something about patients also being aware of that. So I don't know if there's any comms that can go out through whatever channel so that patients are aware that, what we are doing is not off our own backs, but it's through central advice.
Thanks, Alma, that's really helpful. And indeed, some comms have gone out last week, and we're looking to do some London-wide comms to patients again. And it's getting that balance of actually what's helpful, is we don't want to scare people off that often the people who respond to these and then don't come in to see us are those with huge needs. So it's getting that balance right. But we are looking to do more comms across the London region, because yes, it's all very well and good telling us to switch off the tap, but it doesn't help necessarily if our patients do. And there won't be an absolute menu to say at this day cut off at this point, and there has to be local discretion that you need to offer. And we recognise it's really hard. There's lots of practices who've got staff off clinical and non-clinical who are isolating. We know there's an enormous amount of pressure, so we're trying to coordinate it to make it work as much as possible. And also cognizant that if we switch off too much of general practice and people want to access help, they'll go higher up the system, and that will put more pressure on 111. So aware of that balance. But what we do know is as much support, and if people are giving extra support, which is out of your practice time, then in terms of, we need to work that out and work out remuneration for that as well. If it's releasing you from practice time, this is being addressed and this is being looked at. But what I can say is any help you can give either within your practice time or time that you might have individually is hugely supported. So thank you for that. Jonathan. Jonathan, have you got a question? You're on mute if you're trying to talk, Jonathan. I can't hear you.
Thanks very much. Sorry, didn't notice that. Probably put me on mute actually, but never mind. So, I mean, to give time, we'd need to cut sessions here. And at the moment, we've got rising need. Although we've switched now pretty well to only on-the-day bookings, it's going to be hard to cut a session because of the needs of people out there filling up those sessions. I'm not quite sure how we would provide extra time, given that we seem to be very busy at the moment, unlike the first time when people just disappeared and didn't want care, and we were almost twiddling our thumbs at points. I'll go off now.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, aware that we are much busier than we were this time last surge. Aware of that, and this is why there's no directive saying you have to release X amount per 10,000 patients. It's about looking. There's a lot of goodwill in the system. Amazed by the goodwill of general practice, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're doing things you're not going to get paid for them. But people who are working sort of 4 days, saying, well, I want to give a time on where I would have been doing admin, that I'm going to give some of my time. So I think where we mop up where there is goodwill and that there are people doing over and above what they're doing, that's the first thing we look at doing. And then the second thing is looking within your practice is, different practices will have different amounts of flexibilities, and people will be in different circumstances due to isolation as well. So it's about looking, and I just wanted to flag, this is it's never been like this before, and this is much worse than the first surge. That we were not asked to mobilise like we are now, and we're looking across London at how we can streamline this. So thank you for considering it, but recognise how difficult it is for everybody at the moment. Moving on to the positive now, just Anisha's asked if we can do just a quick brief vaccine update. So we have had 3 sites in Barnet go live before the end of the year, so in the end of last year. So Temple Fortune was the first, followed by Wentworth, followed by Oak Lodge, who've been vaccinating, and then this week Lane End, and then Watling are also going online, and next week Grovemead is due to go online. So we will actually have, by the end of next week, 6 sites live in PCNs. What's been amazing is, in addition to this, there have been, at my last count, 17 care homes that have been vaccinated across Barnet. And again, absolute thanks to GPs who, we haven't had a break in ages, and actually people have given up their bank holiday days to go in and vaccinate care homes across Barnet. So 17 at the last count, but there's probably been more since then. So the other key piece of information is that towards the end of the month, Allianz Park is going to go live, and that's going to be the mass sort of super site for vaccinating. And when that gets going, it's going to have at its 5 pods of 500 people a day being vaccinated. So that's 2,500 a day to be vaccinated. So that's going to be terrific once that gets going, and then we'll have to work out quite what the ask is in general practice and what the ask is through the mass vaccination site. It doesn't feel smooth in terms of the rollout, because the delivery information comes really just a few days before, and the ask of mobilisation is huge. So very grateful for the PCN hubs who have been delivering, because the ask is often a few days to mobilise staff and call just over 1,000 patients. So it will get better with time, but at the moment we're limited by lack of knowledge about the vaccine deliveries. You'll all know that AstraZeneca got its temporary licence between Christmas and New Year, and actually the first drops will be going of 400 AstraZeneca to practices to the hubs at the end of this week. And unlike Pfizer, you don't have 3.5 days to use it up. You've got 6 months for it to be sitting in the fridge. So that's absolutely fantastic. I mean, there's tons going on. I would urge you all to get all members of your practices to try to get involved in doing the vaccination, because this is the solution of how we'll get out of this as quickly as possible. So again, very grateful for support that you're able to offer PCNs, because it is a tiring business, and it's not just the clinicians, it's also the admin support and support from any volunteers, be they champions or be they PPG if appropriate, or volunteers of younger cohorts that you have. So that's a very brief roundup of where we are with the vaccine. So happy to answer any questions about that.
Thanks, Charlotte. That was an extremely useful update. There are quite a few questions in the chat. I'm not sure that we'll get through all of them. So just in the interest of time, we may come back to you, but to make up to a few of them, or perhaps address them in an email. Charlotte, should we just do 1 or 2? Lyndon asks, when will broader issues like cough be reviewed, and cannot do this GP work and vaccinations?
So so I hadn't mentioned that, so thanks, Lyndon. Quaff is going to the Quaff is going to be like it was last in the first wave. We're going to not be looking at Quaff like we did previously, and actually they'll be honouring previous achievements in Quaff. So we don't need to worry about not going through all our different chronic disease managements. But again, there's going to be a considered balanced view. So those who are at high risk asthma, COPD, diabetes, you're not going to want to switch off that care, but probably those who are lower down in acuity, those won't be ones that you would want to prioritise at the moment, and your help would be best given elsewhere. So again, there's not an absolute set answer for every patient or every practice. It's using, our vast amounts of experience and knowledge to help come up with sensible decisions. I mean, I'm happy to answer all the other questions that I can by email, if that's the help.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, I think it's already +1, so I think that's probably the best option.
So shall I go? Okay, I'll introduce then the next session, which is it's the end of life care, and
I think we'll hand over to Anuj first.
Fine, lovely. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, just for a quick update. Sorry, Charlotte. Yeah, so over to Anuj just for a quick Federation update.
Thanks, Anisha.
And then to Amita just for 1 to 2 minute training hub update, and then we'll start with end of life.
I'll do a very quick update. Thanks, Anisha. It's just from the Federation. Just to wish everybody a happy new year again, and stay safe and well. And thank you for all your support. Could you go to the next slide? So just regarding our services, the EAS service did have additional capacity, which was stepped up during Christmas and New Year, so over December and January. So thank you for all the colleagues that stepped up, particularly over the bank holidays and the period over the festive period. So they have done an amazing amount of work, and it's been an incredibly challenging amount of work that we've had, and the capacity has allowed us, if we go to the next slide, to see where we are with that. So if you look, the projected for January is that we're still on track, and that also includes our increased capacity that's been agreed. So what I would say to our member practices is that please do use the EAS slots. They are available, they are ring fenced for the routine work, so please do use them to release the capacity that you might be finding in practice during the day. Next slide. Just regarding the other services, so EHS, some of the PCNs have repurposed EHS to support with the COVID vaccine clinics, and I'll touch on that. I know Charlotte's done a brief update. I just wanted to touch on it as a site as well, so I'll just touch on that at the end. And the anti-coag service is running as normal, so please do refer in. And if you do want us to do the searches for you, please email us so we can do those searches for you. Next slide. Just in terms of new services, so I know, Charlotte, you mentioned about the community step-down beds at RNOH. So that service ceased on the 6th of January, which is today, and I think that's becoming a COVID step-down service. So we'll watch out for that, and we will update if we are involved in that as a federation. The rapid response team, so we have been asked for remote GP input into the rapid response service, which commenced from the 2nd of January. And we've gone out to practices to express an interest in covering that. And it covers from 8 AM till 6:30 PM, Monday to Friday. Next slide. The other services are around A&E support in Barnet Hospital. So we've had conversations with Barnet Hospital where we want to try and help with an organised rota at Barnet so that they get GPs on a regular basis between 1 and 9, Monday to Sunday. We're looking at either expressions of interest by individual GPs or for practices to express an interest. It is on site, and it would mean that you'd have to be there, and we're looking at doing 4-hour sessions there. The other thing is around remote in-hours GP services. So if you are struggling as a practice, whether it's you're down because of staff from COVID, whether there are other reasons, please do get in touch with us, because we are able to offer some backup GP sessions that might help with managing your practice, patients and practices during the day. So just do let us know and bear us in mind. And there's also some work around the care home support and step down beds from care homes. So just watch out, and we will let you know about those. Next slide. So just an update with regards to the site. So this is a Barnet, the vaccine pipeline, and you can see the data at the top, and the different waves and the different sites that we have, and when they're receiving vaccines and the amounts. So it's just to let you know that we are trying to receive them as continually as possible over all the sites, and as much as possible. So there are quite a lot of vaccines coming in this week and then the following week as well. Last slide. There's been a lot of work as well around the care homes. So these are the current care homes that have been vaccinated across Barnet in the different PCNs, and I know there are plans tomorrow as well for COVID vaccine to go out to care homes. I just wanted to say thank you to all the staff that have been involved with all the sites currently, and also a plea that if you do have anybody who's interested, as Charlotte said, either being marshals, care coordinators, vaccinators, whatever you want to try and help us with, that would be really appreciated. So thank you everybody for all that support as well. Yep, I think that's it. Anisha, can I hand back to you?
Brilliant, thanks Anid. So that was really helpful to hear the update. Amita, are you around? We're just going to have a quick nursing training hub update, and then we can hand over to Sarah. Amita, are you there?
Anisha, Amita's on annual leave today. I don't know whether she's in the meeting. It's Jackie.
Fine. Okay. All right. Thanks, Jackie. In that case, we'll hand straight over to Sarah. So we're very happy to have with us today Dr. Sarah Shelley, who is a Macmillan GP lead for end-of-life care, along with the rest of the hospice team, and Theresa Mann, one of the nurse consultants, to talk us through end-of-life care and advanced care planning, as well as CMC, Coordinate My Care. And this aligns with the new LCS that's come out, and it does count as the educational component of the LCS. After about 20-25 minutes or so, we will be breaking out into small groups. So Em will be posting in the chat your PCN link. So please do log out of this meeting and join back into your PCN meeting for further discussions about end-of-life care. Thanks so much, Sarah. Over to you.
Thanks, Anisha. So first of all, Theresa's going to kick off, but I just want to say thank you very much for asking us to do this. I have to say I was nervous that people were so busy this week, but it's incredible again, as always, to see so many Barnet GPs, nurses, and allied health professionals on the meeting, and we're really grateful that you prioritised end-of-life care as the first meeting and the first trial out of the new format. I'm also really grateful to have Theresa Mann, who's nurse consultant at North London Hospice, Dr Joe Brady, who a lot of you know, palliative care consultant, as well as other educators and CNSs from North London Hospice. And just to say, they've asked me to say that they are here to support you. Obviously, this is a very quick run through of advanced care planning and end-of-life care, but they are there whenever you need for support to contact them. So I will hand over to Theresa to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so if we can have our first slide, please. This is a very quick whistle-stop tour, as Sarah said, and I'm just going to go through a very brief sort of talk through some definitions, and then Sarah's going to take over and talk a little bit more about what's involved in a good sort of quality conversation and care plan that can help keep people in their preferred place of care. So what is advanced care planning? Well, you know, in its loosest term, it is a conversation about sort of future wishes, but it's also a voluntary process of discussion sort of undertaken when somebody with capacity really wants to prepare for what their wishes are for when they might lose capacity or when they're less well and unable to make these decisions. It makes clear a person's wishes, usually by writing them down, setting them on record, and is always based on the philosophy of openness and autonomy. Next slide, please. So the things that are normally discussed when you have these conversations, I think people, when we talk about advanced care planning, often there's this concept that it's just one big conversation and it takes a lot of time, it's very complex. It doesn't necessarily have to be. It's often an ongoing dialogue, and that's why it's useful having it written down in a record that lots of people can view, because actually you can add to it as time goes on. So generally things that are discussed are options for future medical treatment and wishes in relation to this. So in terms of what people would want to go to hospital for or not, people's sort of values and beliefs about their care, how they would like to be cared for, where they would like to die, and who they would like to be involved in their care. Sometimes it might involve things like talking about funerals and wills and so on, but not always. And really how somebody would like this conversation documented and shared with other professionals. It also included in this conversation, which you might talk a little bit about completing an advanced decision to refuse treatment or a lasting power of attorney. Next slide, please. So the possible outcomes really are, you know, you're sort of setting out people's views about care and treatment. However, as I said previously, this is not necessarily a legally binding document. It might just be what somebody's sort of preferences and their wishes. But if they did want to do something, write something down that was legally binding, then they might do something, an ADRT, or nominate somebody to be their lasting power of attorney. And very quickly, I'll just go through what's involved in those. So an ADRT is quite specific. It must relate to a specific refusal of a particular treatment and in certain circumstances. So vague sweeping statements like, I just don't want to go back to hospital or what have you, isn't good enough. It has to be particularly what you are refusing, which particular treatment and in which circumstances. The person has to be over 18, have capacity. And if they are saying that they want to have refusal of life-sustaining treatment, this must be in writing, signed and witnessed, and include the statement, even if my life were at risk, for that to be kind of valid. It only comes into effect when the person loses capacity. and those the circumstances it must that are identified within the ADRT. So it is very specific, and if this is all in place and it's valid and applicable, then it is legally binding. Next slide, please. The lasting power of attorney is, as I'm sure you're all aware, a statutory form of power of attorney created under the Mental Capacity Act from 2005, and it covers two areas. So there's health and welfare, property and financial affairs. It is important to clarify, because sometimes people say, oh yes, I have LPA, but actually they're referring to one type when maybe they mean the other. Anybody who has capacity to do so can choose somebody, nominate them, or maybe their attorney to make their decisions on behalf if subsequently they lose capacity. It must be registered with the Office of Legal Guardianship, and there is paperwork involved that you probably will need to see. If people are saying that they have LPA, they need to be able to show the paperwork that goes with this. Next slide, please. So why do we do advanced care planning? Next slide, please. So really, overall, it's to really empower the person, to help prepare them for the future, to help think about when they are less well, when they are and maybe approaching the end of their life, because we don't always know when that might be, and really to achieve that person-centered care and thinking about the person in the middle of all this, really about their values and beliefs, and really involving them in the decision making so that they're able to tell you and tell their loved ones what their wishes are. Next slide, please. So really, when we think about our lives, all of us right now, so far, if we would say what were the biggest events in your life, most people would say, big life events such as possibly getting married or having children. Maybe it would say meeting someone famous, possibly traveling. these are all most people can bring to mind, big events and things that really they feel define them and their lives so far. And then looking to the future, you might then say, well, what would you like to achieve for the rest of your life? And often we talk about this in the sort of general society as the bucket list. Next slide, please. So bucket list often refers to sort of goals you would still like to achieve, dreams you'd want to fulfill, and so on. Things like possibly traveling, maybe running a marathon, starting your own business, etc., etc. And these are things that might be important to you as an individual. So when we think of it in those terms, really, advanced care planning is kind of a sort of similar concept, but for patients maybe thinking about their care and their sort of who they want involved and what they want when they're sort of thinking around their care towards the end of their life. Still equally important, and they may still have very strong views and feelings about what they want and how what they want their end of life care to look like, really. So it's really part of that. These conversations really should be sort of part of that process. So my last slide really is thinking about, next slide, please. So in terms of thinking about, again, why we do it, really in terms of, there's often the question that people ask us is like, but when is the right time? And if someone's in the last 12 months of life or last 18 months of life, is it too early when people aren't ready to hear this? But really, what we try to kind of get the concept of really is that we know from the evidence that the earlier we have these conversations with patients, the more likely they are to achieve their wishes. And that's okay if people change their minds along the way, that's not a problem. But we try and incorporate something called sort of parallel planning, really, in terms of sort of hoping for the best, preparing for the worst, those rainy day conversations, and just really trying to get the concept of not taking away people's hope, very much being hopeful for the future, but really empowering people to think about, but if things don't quite pan out as you want, or when you are less well, what can we do to help support you to ensure that you really do get the care that you want in the way that you want it, and that you are as empowered to be part of these decisions as much as possible. So I'm now going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to talk a little bit more about how in community we can really help support those conversations and document them on CMC and really do good quality records. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Theresa. Can I have the next slide, Emily, please? Thank you. So the next question really is when we have these conversations. And there are different ways of looking at this. So these are the sort of events, I'm not going to read them all out, and you're probably familiar with some of them, but that might trigger the question in your head about when you should do start an advanced care plan conversation. I think the surprise question is one we've all heard about before. When we see our patients, would we expect this patient to be alive in 6 months to a year? And if the answer is no, then that might be a good time to start thinking about it. And that's on a very basic level. Any change in condition, it may be one of your receptionists sort of says, I've noticed that Mr. Smith is coming in, he's getting more frail, he's finding it more difficult to cope. It can be any of our team that flag it up to us, and I think that's really important. Next slide, please. The other thing is about being more proactive. So those people that come into our surgeries or we have contact with, that, you know, we need to think about what's going to trigger us to have the conversation. But actually, we've now got this early toolkit, which is a simple EMIS search, which uses a lot. I'm not going to go into the detail of it because we don't have time, but it uses a lot of clinical codes to give you a list which needs clinical review of the people who are likely to be in the last year of their life. A number of us on this call have done it. We've looked at it. The list that it brings up is mostly really sensible, but it actually brings up people you may not have been aware of before, those with heart failure, liver failure, people who we're not seeing on our radar, and actually it's really helpful to then be more proactive and say that these are the people that we should be having our advanced care planning conversations with. So that is available, and we'll send out how you access that, but it's very easy and that's a good way to do it. So next slide, please. So I mean, this I've kindly taken from Natalie Zhang, who's been doing some fantastic work with practice nurses in Barnet, helping them to understand advanced care planning and how they can help with the process. So she kindly lent me this slide. But the whole point of this is it's teamwork, it's the whole process. So it's recognizing that someone might be coming to the end of their lives, initiating a conversation in a compassionate way, having those conversations, documenting and sharing it. And again, I mean, I can't stress how important this is. Having the conversations is a difficult process both for you and the patient. They don't want to be having it over and over again. They would like to know that what they say is then shared with the people that are going to be involved in their care across the system. And so documenting and sharing is really important. And what is also really important is then reviewing that constantly, making sure it's up to date, making sure it's relevant. And it's also understanding that the point of having the advanced care plan conversations is so that we can put things in place proactively to support what our patients' wishes are. It's not just to have the conversation, it's about them putting things in place so they feel understood, they feel supported, they know what's happening, their family understands what's happening, and so does the wider healthcare team. I have to say that on the training that Natalie did, we heard some absolutely phenomenal stories from practice nurses across Barnet of the work they've been doing. So it's just to reiterate, this is not all just the GPs, it is our healthcare assistants, our nurses, our receptionists. Everybody needs to be part of this. And now, certainly, I know in our practice, the amazing work that some of the pharmacists are doing with the PCN, with frailty and polypharmacy, they can also help with these conversations. So, and that helps support us. So next slide, please. What stops us doing it? This is a really difficult area of healthcare. It could be that we're uncomfortable, we don't feel that we've got the knowledge or the understanding, we're worried about upsetting people. It's a really big problem. We know that in the UK, about over 70% of people will actually die without a will because they don't want to have these conversations. And they don't know how to have them or who to have them with. We can see as well that only 8% of the public in England and Wales have completed a document of any kind relating to their advanced care planning, and we need to open that up. We need to think about it more. So next slide, please. So these are things that might factor in for our patients. Some people just feel that they're tempting fate by talking about it. Culturally, they find it difficult to accept mortality. Concerns about changing priorities might affect whether they want to talk to you or not. So, I mean, again, any of these things, not wanting to burden their family can go both ways. So many times you'll say, well, I'll leave it to my children to decide. But actually, if you say to them, having these conversations before takes a huge burden off the family because then your wishes are known, then that's often really helpful. But it's just, you've got to think the person is not on their own. They're part of a system, they're part of a family. So think about all the things that might be stopping them from doing it, and how you can help them to move forward with it as well. Next slide, please. And for us, just some of the things I was talking about before, often it's people not feeling confident, worried they're going to say the wrong thing. The biggest thing we all know is lack of time. These are not conversations you can have in 10 minutes. It's obviously even harder now where we're not seeing people face to face. If things are very busy and you've got constant interruptions, that's not good either. And they're all things we need to be aware of and try and manage so that we can help our patients to move forward with these conversations. Next slide, please. We're going to move on from that one, please. Okay, so CMC, I mean, most of you have heard me banging on about this now for the last year and a half. All I can say is that as a team in Barnet, we have done amazingly. I mean, between the 1st of April and the 30th of October, 2,517 care plans were created and published in Barnet, and over 80% of those were in primary care. So, I mean, that's an incredible number. And we were talking the other day about, we had a Pan Barnet meeting in November 2017 in Elstree at the hotel there, which I'm sure a lot of you were at. And we talked about CMC then, and the difference between where we were then and where we are now is phenomenal. So we've got to just keep moving forward and keep making sure that we get better. What I think is almost more important, and I hope helps you to understand why we're doing these plans, is that there were, in the same time period, there were 2,466 views of care plans by urgent care. So that's LAS, out-of-hours GPs and the acute trusts actually viewing the records that you are creating. So they are being read, they are being looked at, and they do make a difference to how a patient is looked after. That doesn't mean it was 2,466 records, by the way. It might have been multiple views of the same one, but even so, it's a huge number, and that is going up all the time. So just be mindful that this is our way of communicating. This is our way of talking to LAS and to our colleagues. And I think that's really helpful when we're writing them, to remember what we're putting in there. The more information we can get in there, the better. I think some of you have kindly recently taken part in an audit of the quality of records, and it's often the fields that are not mandatory. It's often the fields like the treatment escalation plan or personal contacts that actually make the biggest difference on the ground. So we will, again, be sharing findings of the audit, but I think often keeping in mind who you're talking to and what you need them to know is really helpful. Often recording discussions, especially where they've been difficult or there've been challenges getting to a decision, is again really helpful for someone walking into a situation to know where they're up to. And a big thing as well is just making sure they're relevant and up to date. Next slide, please. So this is just from the training site. It's not a real patient, but we'll be able to see it a little bit more clearly. This is the treatment escalation plan page, and there's a lot of information there on the right, which we'll have a look at on the net. So next slide, please. So this is here. If you can, again, this is not a real patient, so there's no confidentiality issues. But again, this is helpful. This is what LAS will see when they come out. What you have to remember about LAS as well is that they're a bit like us as GPs. They know a bit about everything. They are not experts in end-of-life care, so you can have the drugs there, but unless they say what they're actually for, they won't always know. The more information you can put in here, whether it's about what music the patient likes, how they like to be talked to, who should be called, the better for the teams looking after them. Next page, please. Oh, sorry, there seems to be one missing, but there was one. There was a page where we had a record which showed that patient wanted symptomatic treatment at home, which is the same as on the left-hand side here. And then in the treatment escalation plan, it just said has oral, and that was the only information that was available. So again, that's not very helpful for a team coming out or for an out-of-hours GP, or for us doing extended access the services when that's the only information available? How are we going to actually keep that patient at home? So just the more information, the better. If we can move on again now, please. We're gonna skip the activity because we don't actually have time for that now. We've sort of run over quite a lot, and we do want to split off into the groups to do the cases. Can we keep going and again and again and again? Right. So can you go back one? Yeah. Sorry. Thank you. So okay. So this is on the NCL intranet. We can send the link out, and we will send the slides out afterwards. But on here is all the information you need. There's symptom control. There's which chemists are open out of hours and at the weekend. There's the link to the early tool. There's lots of links about resources, about having end-of-life conversations. There's a huge amount of support on the NCL intranet, so do please use it. And if you can think of anything else you want on there, then do be in touch with us and we can do that. Okay. The next slide, please. Is that the end of it? Okay. What I do want to just say, a couple of key messages. When you're doing the advanced care plan thing, first of all, with this patient sitting in front of me, benefit from an advanced care plan. Check if they have a CMC record. What we're hearing from some of the nurses at the hospice is that actually patients now coming out of Barnet and Royal Free are having CMC plans created in bigger numbers. There's a huge push across the system, and there's lots of projects going on. So check if they have one already, because there may actually be a lot of information there for you as well. Make sure any records are relevant, useful, and reviewed and monitored. So if you're seeing someone, if something changes clinically, please update the CMC so that everyone understands where people are up to. And just to say, this is normally a 2-hour talk, which has been compressed into 20 minutes. There is an offer of a 3-hour course run by developed by UCL partners called Talking Prognosis and DNA CPR. On the feedback form, there is a question about that, whether you'd be interested. If anyone is interested in doing that, I know now 3 hours is going to seem like a huge amount of time that we don't have, but certainly in the future as well, we can support that through the hospice and the training hub. So any expressions of interest, please let us know. So that was a really whistle-stop talk. Sorry.
Thank you, Sarah. That was extremely useful. There have been a couple of really useful comments from Joe and also Justin in the chat about the use of CMC with London Ambulance Service and how useful it was in preventing an unnecessary admission. And Justin says, reminder of the large proportion of end-of-life care management that occurs in the out-of-hours setting, and CMC is therefore essential for ensuring patients' wishes are met in that setting. Justin, the videos will be on the Training Hub website. So now we are going to break off into PCN groups just for further discussion. And there are some really interesting cases about end-of-life care. So would you be able to post the links now into the chat? Sorry if I've missed them and you have done that already. Just for each group, have a check to see which PCN you're in. Thank you. Since Emma started doing that, some PCN 1D is already up. If you're not sure which PCN you are in, hopefully you've emailed Jill ahead of time. If you haven't, please join one of the smaller PCNs, which generally tends to be one, in terms of attendance, 1W and 4. So take your pick. All right, so you're welcome to leave this chat and then join your relevant PCN groups now. Thanks, everyone. It was brilliant to see 150 of you here at this meeting today, even during these really busy times in general practice. So well done for attending, and please join your small group for further